Imagine a powerful US Congresswoman standing in front of the world, delivering a speech so impactful that it leaves an African president in tears. What did she say that sparked a global movement, turned heads, and changed the course of international diplomacy? Stick around to find out how one unexpected statement turned into a wave of hope for millions. Dear friends, what you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a glimpse into a world where quiet courage reshapes destinies and dignity outshines power. These are the voices often missed by the headlines, but not here. If this kind of storytelling moves you, if it stays with you long after the screen fades, we invite you to subscribe and ring the bell. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We read every word. Now let's begin. In a bustling conference hall in Washington, D.C., the spotlight was on one woman, Representative Jasmine Crockett, as she stepped up to the podium. Known for her fierce advocacy on issues of justice, racial equality, and human rights, she was about to give a speech that would send shockwaves far beyond the United States. As the audience settled into their seats, there was no expectation that her words would extend beyond the usual calls for reform. Yet, what came next was not only a call to action, it was an unexpected tribute that would reverberate halfway across the world. Crockett, speaking with a fire and conviction that could only come from years of fighting systemic injustice, looked directly into the camera. Her gaze was unflinching as she spoke of Africa's struggle for dignity. She turned her attention to the leaders in the West, challenging them to rethink their approach. Africa doesn't need saviors, she boldly stated. It needs partnerships based on mutual respect. The words were not just an ideological stance, they were a challenge, not only to the audience in front of her, but to the very world order that had long been shaped by colonial influence. But what really stopped the world in its tracks was when she spoke of one leader, one whose name would take center stage in her address, Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. President Traoré, she continued, her voice steady, yet filled with admiration, has shown the world that true leadership is about placing the needs of your people above external pressure, and that dignity and sovereignty are the foundation of true development. These words, which seemed to come from a place of deep respect, echoed louder than any political speech or diplomatic dialogue ever could. She wasn't just acknowledging Traoré's leadership, she was validating it, uplifting it in a way that few Western politicians would dare to do. In the dimly lit office of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré sat frozen. His hand gripped the edge of his desk, as if to steady himself from the unexpected weight of what he had just heard. Never had he imagined that a US Congresswoman, one whose influence stretched beyond borders, would praise his country and his leadership on a global platform. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen, speechless. This was more than just a compliment. It was a public endorsement that neither he nor his country had ever anticipated. As the applause from the Washington audience filled the room, Traoré sat still, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. A moment that would not only change his perception of international politics, but also shape the future of his country in ways he could never have predicted. What followed was the beginning of a global movement that would unite unlikely allies and challenge the world's view on leadership and partnership. The days following Jasmine Crockett's speech were filled with a sense of anticipation and reflection. For Ibrahim Traoré, the speech not only validated his leadership, but also reignited a sense of purpose that had long been simmering beneath the surface. In his presidential office in Ouagadougou, he replayed the recording of her words over and over again, each time with a deeper sense of pride. But more than pride, there was a quiet recognition of something he had always known, that leadership rooted in dignity, respect, and self-reliance could not only survive, but thrive even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the international community digested Crockett's praise, Traoré realized that this moment marked a pivotal shift in how his country was perceived. For too long, Burkina Faso and many African nations had been subjected to the narrative of need, constantly depicted as victims in need of saving by more powerful nations. But Crockett's words shifted that narrative, giving voice to a truth that had been ignored for generations. Africa didn't need to be saved, it needed to be respected, it needed partners, not benefactors. The recognition of his leadership was a catalyst, sparking something much bigger than just political endorsement. It was a call to action. The speech didn't just resonate with Traoré, it resonated with his people. It gave them a new lens through which they could view their own struggles. The message was clear. Dignity was not just a lofty ideal, but a tangible force, capable of driving real change. As he pondered the implications, Traoré knew he had to do something more than just accept the praise. This was his moment to harness the power of this international attention and convert it into something lasting for his people. He made the decision that would define his next steps. He would take action, not just as a leader, but as an advocate for a new, globally resonant vision for Africa's future. In his address to the nation, he shared the profound impact that Crockett's words had on him. But it wasn't just about acknowledging the compliment, it was about opening a new chapter for Burkina Faso. Traoré called for unity, for a commitment to self-sufficiency, and for partnerships based on mutual respect rather than charity. His speech struck a chord with the citizens who had long known the limitations of external aid. With newfound pride, they embraced the idea that true change would come from within, fueled by their own resilience, their own creativity, and their own dignity. The world was beginning to see them as equals, not as objects of pity. This wasn't just about one speech, one leader, or one country. It was the start of a movement that was far bigger than any individual. It was about redefining the very essence of leadership and collaboration on a global stage. Through the unexpected words of Jasmine Crockett, President Ibrahim Traoré had found the clarity to transform his country's future, and with it, the future of an entire continent. In the weeks that followed Jasmine Crockett's remarkable speech, Ibrahim Traoré found himself reflecting deeply on the path ahead. He had already navigated a tumultuous political landscape, yet the words of an American congresswoman had shown him the power of affirmation. What began as a routine address at an international conference had turned into a defining moment, one that not only reshaped his public perception, but also connected him to a global movement of self-respecting leaders who rejected dependency and embraced sovereignty. For the first time in years, Traoré felt the weight of his leadership in a new light. It wasn't just about national development, it was about challenging the long-held narrative that Africa needed to be saved. Crockett's speech had painted a vivid portrait of what was possible when nations stood on their own terms with respect and dignity at the forefront. In that moment, he realized that his own actions were part of a much larger conversation about the future of the African continent. The speech and its global reverberations encouraged Traoré to move beyond the ceremonial and into the practical. He knew that in order for his nation to thrive, there could no longer be a reliance on foreign aid. Burkina Faso needed to foster relationships based on equality and respect. He could not let this rare recognition pass without action. His next step was clear. He had to transform his country's internal policies to reflect the very values Crockett had praised. He launched the Global Dialogues for Dignity initiative, a platform for leaders across the globe to come together, not as benefactors and recipients, but as equals. The initiative would focus on collaboration, mutual support, and, most importantly, shared leadership. It was a call for a new era where Africa's leaders and those from other parts of the world could stand together and discuss solutions based on their own realities, not foreign-imposed frameworks. In the days following, the initiative took on a life of its own. It wasn't just a political campaign, it was a movement fueled by a shared vision. People in Burkina Faso, especially the younger generation, began organizing community events, sharing their stories, and discussing how they could contribute to the nation's self-sufficiency. They were no longer passive participants in global debates. They were active change-makers, inspired by the leadership they now saw reflected in Traoré's actions and Crockett's words. For Traoré, the movement was not just about empowering his own people, but about setting an example that would ripple across the globe. It was about challenging outdated stereotypes, changing the conversation about Africa's future, and proving that leadership was not about dominance, but about collective empowerment. And as his country moved forward with renewed hope, the legacy of Jasmine Crockett's words became more than a fleeting moment. It was a defining catalyst for a shift that would leave a lasting impact on the future of Burkina Faso and beyond. As the weeks passed, Ibrahim Traoré found himself grappling with the responsibility of the new movement he had sparked. The Global Dialogues for Dignity initiative had taken off, but it wasn't just the global recognition that drove him forward. It was the growing sense of purpose within his people, the heart of Burkina Faso. The initiative wasn't merely a diplomatic tool, it had become a lifeline to those who had long felt forgotten, those whose dignity had been trampled under the weight of colonial history and foreign dependence. And now the weight of leadership felt different. It was no longer about him or even his government. It was about the collective, about empowering his citizens to stand tall in their own right. In his heart, Traoré knew the true power of leadership wasn't in speeches or policies, it was in everyday people feeling seen, heard, and valued. The movement that Jasmine Crockett had unwittingly helped ignite was now a reflection of that principle. Across the country, from the bustling streets of Ouagadougou to the quiet rural villages, citizens were responding to the call for a more dignified future. They were organizing, teaching, and building. The energy was palpable. One such example was Fatou, a woman from a small village in the east of Burkina Faso. Fatou had been trained in carpentry through one of the newly established community programs funded by the government's push for self-reliance. At first, Fatou had struggled to feed her children, but now she was not only providing for her family, but also teaching other women the skills she had learned. She had become a symbol of the change Traoré envisioned, a woman who had risen from the constraints of poverty to become a pillar in her community. When asked how she felt about her transformation, Fatou spoke with pride. "I am not just building furniture, I am building a future." This was what Traoré had always hoped for, a country where people no longer waited for charity or aid, but actively sought solutions for their own struggles. Each story of change, from women like Fatou to small farmers who were now planting crops without waiting for foreign assistance, filled him with a deep sense of hope. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead remained fraught with challenges, but the progress was undeniable. The impact of Jasmine Crockett's speech continued to echo in the lives of those who felt inspired by it. It had reached beyond borders, bridging political divides and turning a simple message of dignity into a powerful call for action. The bond between the United States and Burkina Faso had evolved into something deeper, built not on the old framework of aid and dependence, but on respect and collaboration. It wasn't about saving Africa, it was about standing side by side with Africa in its pursuit of self-determination. For Traoré, this was only the beginning. His resolve had grown stronger, and the work ahead was clear. The initiative wasn't just a conversation, it was the foundation of a movement that was reshaping the future of Burkina Faso, and it was now, more than ever, a call to the world to join in building a more just and equitable global community. As the world began to take notice of the Global Dialogues for Dignity initiative, it became clear that the vision Traoré had laid out for Burkina Faso was beginning to transcend national borders. But even with this growing international momentum, it wasn't the global applause that mattered most to him. It was the quiet, transformative moments unfolding every day within his own country. Each day he saw the fruits of his vision coming to life, not in grand political speeches, but in the quiet acts of resilience and self-determination taking root among the people of Burkina Faso. One such moment took place in a small village on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, where a community meeting had been called to discuss the local projects inspired by the Sovereign Future initiative. In attendance was Mariama, a local mother who had been trained to run a small cooperative that now produced handmade baskets sold in the markets. When Mariama first spoke about her journey, she couldn't help but shed a tear. "I remember when I thought I'd never have enough to feed my children. But now, every day, I make something from nothing. And that's not just a lesson for me, it's a lesson for my children and for the children who come after." It was in these moments that Traoré felt his leadership validated, not by applause, but by the silent, persistent work of ordinary people who had finally found the tools to rebuild their lives with dignity. The changes weren't just about access to resources, they were about reclaiming pride and autonomy. His work was now the backdrop to a wave of personal transformations. Mariama's success wasn't just about economic prosperity, it was about reclaiming a piece of what had been lost, self-worth. Across the country, similar stories were emerging. Farmers who had once been dependent on external aid were now cultivating their own land with new techniques taught in government-supported workshops. Children who had grown up with limited access to education were now sitting in classrooms, some of them for the first time, and being taught not only skills, but the importance of agency. These weren't just small victories, they were symbols of a much larger, more profound change. In a quiet moment of reflection, Traoré sat at his desk in the presidential palace, surrounded by reports and plans, but it was the simple letter he had received from Jasmine Crockett that weighed most heavily on his heart. She had expressed gratitude for the steps he was taking and offered her continued support for the Global Dialogues for Dignity initiative. Her words of praise felt like a validation of everything he had fought for. But it wasn't just about the recognition, it was the affirmation that his vision, shared by people across the world, had become a powerful tool for change. The connection between him and Jasmine had sparked something that neither of them could have predicted, and as more leaders from around the world began to join the conversation, Traoré realized that the future of Burkina Faso and the future of Africa could be shaped not by the dictates of foreign aid, but by the self-determination of its people. This was a new kind of diplomacy, one based on mutual respect, on listening to the voices of those who had been silenced for too long, and on building a future where dignity, rather than dependency, was the foundation of progress. In the story of President Ibrahim Traoré and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, we witnessed the power of compassion and mutual respect in driving global change. What began as a moment of unexpected praise from Crockett for Traoré's leadership in Burkina Faso became the foundation for a larger global movement, the Global Dialogues for Dignity initiative. This initiative, born from a speech that transcended typical political rhetoric, emphasizes the need for partnerships based on mutual respect rather than paternalistic aid. Traoré's vision for his country was simple yet profound: sovereignty and dignity for all. He worked tirelessly to empower his people, seeing that they could rise from the ashes of colonial dependency and chart their own path forward. Crockett's support served as a powerful acknowledgement that his vision was not only viable but essential. Together, they demonstrated that leadership, at its core, is about uplifting others and listening to their needs, not imposing solutions from the outside. Their shared commitment to these principles sparked the beginnings of a powerful global dialogue. The story teaches us that real change doesn't come from grand gestures but from consistent, small actions driven by empathy, respect, and a desire for collaboration. Whether it's supporting local communities, advocating for human dignity, or working to create lasting change, we all have a role to play. In a world that often feels divided, we are reminded that bridges are built through understanding, shared goals, and mutual support. The question for each of us is, how can we contribute to the creation of a world where dignity and collaboration are the foundation of progress? Quiz time. What was the main lesson from the story? A. True leadership is about empowering others through empathy and respect. B. Leaders must impose their vision for the betterment of society. Please comment your answer, A or B. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Also, feel free to share your opinions about the story and how you think it can be applied to your own life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that aim to make a difference.